Well, here we are. This is the Richard and Judy Book Club, exclusively with W.H. Smith, and here's the next book on our list of 8 for the spring. It's one of my favourites on the list, actually. It's called The Paris Wife by Paula McLain. And it's a novel, but it actually tells the kind of true story of Ernest Hemingway's first marriage. It was to a woman who was 8 years older than him that he met in Chicago. She thought, she was in her late 20s by then, that she was going to be on the shelf. But then she met Hemingway, who was 21, 22, just back from the First World War, a bit shell-shocked. And they fell for each other, and they ended up going to live in France, where he thought, in Paris, yeah, where he thought he might be inspired by the other expats, American expats over there. Some of the biggest names of the time, Ezra Pound, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and they go. And it's a semi-true story, and it's a wonderful romance, isn't it?
It's a wonderful romance, and it's also fantastically atmospheric of that jazz age, you know, F. Scott Fitzgerald and all the rest of it. The Americans in Paris, they literally took over Paris in those days. They all had a fantastic time. They all spent their time in these cafes having intellectual, literary conversations.
Lots of sex. And
lots of drink, lots of that. One of the interesting things is that she makes it clear that the girl he marries, that he was Hemingway was so handsome, a god. And I'd never thought of him like that, because I've only ever seen him heavily bearded, but apparently he was a gorgeous boy.
He was a fit lad, by all accounts. Anyway, it's a terrific story. You'll really enjoy it. Sadly, we couldn't actually meet face-to-face with Paula McLain, so we sent our cameras to her, and this is what she had to say about a fine piece of writing.
When I was working on the book, I often actually, when I go and do events, people say, well, did you go to Paris to do your research? And the answer is yes, sort of. When I was working on the first draft of the book, I had quit my teaching job and was dead broke, and I had maybe $600 in my savings account, so I actually couldn't afford to go around the corner. I wrote in a Starbucks very near my house, and I'll tell you that a Starbucks in Cleveland is not at all like a cafe in Paris. But what happened when I was working on the book was that I became so transported by what I was learning about Hemingway's early life and the books that I was reading about jazz age Paris, bohemian Paris, which I think is one of the most fascinating times in history, not just literary history. And it was like climbing into a time machine every day. Each day's writing was like climbing into a time machine, and I was literally swept away by all I was learning. So I think some of what comes across in the book is the energy that's created in the book really was created by my own passion and fascination for the age. I do believe that I have a great bit of fun psychologizing Hemingway in my novel. I think there's not too many people in the world in history more fun to psychologize than Hemingway. He was such an enigma. He had so many facets to his personality. Hadley once said late in her life when she was being interviewed by one of Hemingway's biographers that he had more sides to him than any geometry book could ever chart. And this is the Hemingway that I came to know as well. And I think writing from his point of view also helped give me a little entree into what he was thinking and feeling, and particularly at this point in his life when he was just getting started as a writer, and up in his garret in Paris, sort of burning his little kind of chunks of coal and writing one true sentence at a time before ambition had come along and ruined him. I did fall a little in love with Hemingway when I was writing this book, and I find it so interesting. So when I was on tour for the book, promoting, it was actually several months of traveling, and I did maybe 20 or 30 different events, and quite often what happened was I would have some woman stand up in the audience and ask exactly that question. I think you were a bit in love with him, weren't you? Or that you were swooning over the young Hemingway, and actually I don't think that I really could have helped it. The young Hemingway, first of all, aside from being incredibly electric and electrifying and magnetic and had incredible energy, was gorgeous. Like, seriously gorgeous. You have to Google him right now and find, for instance, his 1923 passport photo, or pictures from his and Hadley's first skiing trip to Chambly in 1922. There's a virility and I think kind of an intensity of life. Those who knew him at that time described him as the most alive person they had ever met. So he crackled, and I really think that this is what Hadley kind of fell for in him too. She had lived such a quiet life, and here was this man who had was really ready to kind of devour life, right? To be at life's table, and he invited her to that. I used the historical facts, or the historical record rather, in this novel. And I had never written a historical novel before, nor had it ever occurred to me to write one. So I was feeling my way along much of the time. The historical record really works as to provide the scaffolding for my book. For instance, the day that they were married, and on December 8th they sailed to Paris, and this was the name of the ship. Or on this day, Hemingway first learned that his first book would be published. Or this is the day that Hemingway walks into the Dingo Bar in Paris, and lo and behold, who's sitting there but F. Scott Fitzgerald. So all of this is true and very well documented. I might have read 20 biographies of Hemingway's life. I mean, there are many, many people who have, sort of furiously written down the details. The bit that we don't know, and the bit that actually sort of the book really required me to meet with my imagination, is all that a biographer would never presume to know. What they said behind closed doors, how they made love, what they fought about, right? What they argued about on the street. All of the dialogue I had to invent because there was no stenographer kind of furiously jotting down what these people were saying. He was a meticulous kind of journaler of his own time. For instance, he kept a notebook writing down how many words he wrote every day and how much money they spent at the grocer's, and all of his correspondence. And so the record is pretty full. And yet what what no one could have possibly known is what their interior lives were like. And so that was the bit that I had to feel my way in. And I think the most useful tool for that was finding a cache of their love letters. So they meet at a party in Chicago in 1920, and for the next 11 months they furiously kind of correspond back and forth between Chicago, where he is living, and St. Louis, where she is living, and there are several thousand pages of love letters between Hadley and Ernest during that time, all of which he kept until the end of his life. He kept her letters. She kept his letters as well, and then when they separated and divorced in 1926, she destroyed his letters, which is a terrible loss, but you can understand how that might have happened.
Well, thank you very much, Paula, and congratulations on a lovely, wonderful book. Just a reminder, it's called The Paris Wife by Paula McLain, whom you've just seen. And it's a fantastic story, all that jazz age in Paris and everything. 1920s, Americans in Paris, great read.
Obviously, you can read details of what we think about it in our reviews on the website, but we'd like to know what you think as well. We love reading your reviews, so please post them. You come to whsmith.co.uk/Richard and Judy. It can be as short as you like, a sentence, it can be 1,000 words. We just love reading what you think about the books that we've personally chosen. So go on, get writing.